everyone, and welcome to our podcast, Clear as Mud, where we talk to game developers from all walks of life about their personal and professional journeys. I'm your host, Graham Waldrop. As always, our show is presented by Mudstack, the only asset management and collaboration tool custom built for game studios and digital artists. For more information, head over to mudstack.com. Today, we welcome Fabio Corrirossi, Technical Director at Third Kind Games. We talk about how Fabio had to teach himself programming in order to carve out a career in the industry, his role in the creation of the first ever comic book designed for VR, and in the ongoing polarizing battle of creating art through AI. He offers an argument that lies directly in the middle of the debate. All right, enough explanation of what's to come. Here it is right now. Here's our interview with Fabio Corrirossi. This VR comic book you made, Magnetique, I was looking through it, and it's not just like you're in VR and you're reading through a comic book in some like VR space. This is actually like a fully immersive VR experience, like audio, voice acting, music, and puts you sort of right in the world of the story. And you're saying this is the first of its kind, that it had never been attempted, something like this had never been attempted before.
That's correct. We trouble checked that it was correct back in day. It was a weird idea we had about how to exploit VR in a different way. Of course, the great part of my career is in gaming, but I like comics very much. I actually was a script writer, but that was a different part of my life that it wasn't really connected to the video game. But I thought, hey, let's merge the two worlds. And we had this idea about trying to exploit what was at the time what was something that wasn't very explored like it is right now, which is 360 drawing. At the moment, 360 drawing is way more present with posts on Facebook, and there are websites, but back then there wasn't really any, and we ended up creating a very small tool in Photoshop where you can pretty much draw in unwrapped cube, and then draw in every face of the cube, and then this little plugin in Photoshop was actually giving you already the preview of what was going on in 360, and we used that kind of like as a proof of concept, and then we decided, hey, let's make a comic out of it. We kind of designed it on a way that it was immersive, but not requesting you to go through every direction. There are several aspects of when you design a game or an experience in VR, and I was actually teaching these kind of aspects in some of the university in Rome, and there is some rules like the 90 degrees rule or the 180 degrees rules that tells you that pretty much the center of the action should be in a place that is either in front of you or just not very far away. So you should never put stuff in the back if you're not aiming people to move around in that kind of experience. Of course, that was much more true back in the day when you had way less freedom than now. Nowadays, you have Oculus Quest and all these systems that have inside tracking. You can go inside a room and you can literally track all your room and turn around as you wish, etc. But sometimes accessibility in VR is not as pushed as in other entertainment. So it was nice to say, hey, you're reading comics, you're fully immersed into it, so you have this world that revolves around you, and you can literally look at like it was a 3D scene, but it wasn't. It was it was all full drawn by a friend, which is a comic artist in Italy, which is Emilio, and but we also want to pay attention on how you read things, how the balloon should zoom in when you gaze to them, how the voiceover will detect how you experience the product. So there were several considerations. It wasn't very successful. We released it on Gear VR and we released it on Steam. It didn't come out from the pack, and so we decided not to go forward, but I still believe the proof of concept can be used by many others, and I believe we actually with that plugin especially, we push forward this concept. I can see that this is used at the moment mostly from people doing skydomes for VR games, but I still believe it was a fun attempt, and I actually like that. Tried. Despite working on many games, sometimes the best memories I had are not from the games that are played by the most players, but sometimes there are some particular cases where you enjoy some of the little products, and I believe this is true for many indie developers that happen to work in the AAA world.
So, what was your role on that?
I back then I was the head of the XR department for the company, so pretty much the lead programmer, but I also wrote the story. So
Okay.
I was kind of both in the creative and in the tech direction for that, which is unusual, and I don't recommend it, never. But
That's a lot of hats to be wearing.
it is, and it was fun because as a coder, you rarely get a chance to be that involved with creative. You all, of course, need, especially when you come into leadership position, to be a bridge between department, talk to QA, talk to designers, feedback as much as you can, especially in an industry like the video game industry, which is a lot of iterative work, a lot of creative design work, and you end up being a little bit of designer, just that 1-2% that you need. Still, when you get to do it even more, it's actually very fun.
And so, what was it like when you're talking about the artistic process of it, when you're creating a story that's normally meant to be consumed from one angle, like each panel or each shot in the comic book is from a specific angle, but you have the ability as the player to look around, and you are in this 360 sort of perspective, like you were talking about. What was the biggest challenge, I guess, for your artist when?
Well, there were a couple of challenges of different aspects. I believe one was purely technical, which is the section in the face of the cube where two faces are meeting. And that particular side, when you're drawing, you can feel it's kind of like you are in a box if you don't do it well. It was actually, I still remember vividly that John Carmack actually reviewed our product on Facebook and called us out and tell us what was going wrong with it. We actually felt like it was like a god call whenever John Karma tells you something like that. You say, "Hey, okay, let's stop everything and let's listen to his review." And he was suggesting some other things like using a cylindrical approach, but we felt that the cube one with the right approach would be the best one. And um, we came up with some conclusion about how the environment should be drawn, how the character should be inside the face and not crossing the face of the cube. So there were some technical aspects that we solved. Creative wise, again, the biggest one that we had to solve was where are you looking and where the people will be looking. So there were details right in your back that were nice addition to the story,
Mm-hmm.
but they were not fundamental. So if you
Right.
lose them, you don't lose the thread of the story.
Yeah, it seemed like, you'd always get, from what I saw, you would sort of be put in a position initially, you'd see kind of the shot, and then you'd have the ability to kind of look around your environment if you wanted to from there. But you always had, it seemed like every time there was a new scene, there was always like the camera was very clear about what it was showing initially, what's going on, and then you have the ability just to sort of look around, which I thought was smart and sort of keeps your focus on where it needs to be, but then you have that extra freedom if you want it.
That's correct. It's, if you want to put a video game analogy, it's like main mission, main story mission, main story quest versus secondary quest. You always have that quest that you can carry through, and it will take you at the end of the game, but then you can explore even more. And back then there was this interesting thing where everybody were focusing on having the full 360 experience. It was like, hey, I'm doing VR, I need to exploit all 360. Thank God that those times are dead. And now, especially game developers that realize that you need to be more focused and you need to be more. Do you need to put more attention on what are you presenting? But there was one particular case which was Mr. Robot's VR experience, which was a 360 video. So playing full actors with Rami Malek and other other actors from the cast. And Sam Raimi did a very good job into understanding that, probably for one of the first time using fully that kind of VR immersive experience. And it was actually very cool to look at those solutions and see how many analogies there were with what we were trying to do. We felt like we were in the right direction. So we actually went to France to participate to a contest, and there were many other 360 videos that were suffering from the fact that you were needed to turn around a lot. Again, I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. I'm just saying you should do it with a purpose, not
Yeah.
just to say to people they should turn around like crazy.
Yeah. No, definitely. And what year was this when this came out?
2016,
Oh
17, I
wow.
believe.
Yeah. And that's right around the time we were doing VR stuff too. And we were in Gear VR and Oculus. And I mean it's come so far since then. So I mean you were really, one, you're trying to do something no one's done before, and two, you were sort of getting into it during the, sort of advent period, the nascent stage of this sort of VR craze that's really taken off now. But back then it was still very new.
It was, but we started even earlier than that, because when I joined that company before my other video game experience, the company was one of the bakers of the Kickstarter project for Oculus in 2014. So we started even earlier than that. Believe it that whenever we started, there was no motion tracking, no 6DoF, nothing
Right.
of that sort. So everything was generating much more motion sickness than it is right now.
I remember I couldn't use that thing for more than 10 minutes before I was starting to get dizzy.
Keep in mind something. I'm probably one of the best VR tester in Europe.
Yeah.
Because I suffer motion sickness a lot. Like, I cannot even play FPS games without getting sick. And I'm not telling you in VR, like it's straight in a 2D monitor.
Right.
So for me, motion sickness was a very peculiar thing, because if I wanted to code something that I could enjoy myself in the first place, I needed to respect some rules, and there are many rules to trick the mind. There are some that are much more famous, like, for example, if you never accelerate, you usually go and use a linear speed. So if I start to walk, for example, in VR, you should never accelerate, but go from 0 to, I don't know, 10 meters 10 meters per second. I is even too much, but just to understand, I probably described a rocket at this point to another person, without going from 0 to 10. Okay, or other things, like if you need to change the perspective of the camera from one place to another, so pretty much move the camera, you should always do it with a not always, but it's very good practice to do it with shot fade to black, because it tricks the mind to think that they blinked with their eyelids. So the brain registered that as, hey, you closed the eyelid, now you are in another place. Of course, it's weird because you moved to another place, but it's not as weird as if you moved the camera.
Right. I noticed that when you're going, like, during the opening scenes with the war, there was, which makes sense, and that's true in film too. When you have a fade to black, there's a transition of time. And you do that between the chapters too, so that makes sense. That's smart.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna step into the incredibly huge argument of locomotion in VR. I'm not the best expert on it, and I work with some of those. And there are now very clever solutions that are applied during in the most recent gains between different kind of teleportation, different kind of fade to black that are not just fade to black, but they're blurring on the side. And there are also some technique that allows you to have less motion sickness with some LEDs that are right on the side of the face. So there are several solutions. I'm afraid I must tell you that I haven't worked in VR in a few years. Probably I don't have all the latest news, but I tried to keep up because it was a good portion of my life and it was very fun back then.
Why do you think it wasn't successful? And might be a number of reasons for that, but what do you think were the chief reasons for why the project didn't turn out to be financially successful?
I'd say that it was a very low budget project with no marketing at all. It suffered from all the usual suspect that you have from indie market. And if you don't push well your product, you're always come up with a dead solution. And even worse when your user base is tiny, because back then it wasn't like this. Today we have, I don't know how many units sold of PSVR, I don't know how many quests, but we are talking combined some millions. Of course, not everybody will play your game, but at least you have a pool. Back then it was the niche of a niche. So it was like niche times two.
Yeah, it was so damn expensive too to get one of those things, get a headset.
It still is if you see how much they price PSVR 2 that was just released. Like it cost
Sure.
more than a PS5.
Yeah, which is crazy.
I still believe that the biggest difference is always the software. I mean, I love talking about the hardware, the tech, everything you can improve, or some trade-off like you want more mobility, then you need to have a lower GPU, or you want more power, you need to have a cable or something that can cast wireless the image without delays and all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, what sells are the product. And this is something, for example, that Nintendo knows very well. You know that Switch is not the most powerful console ever, to say the least, but they know that the product makes the difference. They know that whenever they release Breath of the Wild, they're going to have lots of people buying it. Same with Animal Crossing, same with Pokemon, etc. I believe PSVR 2 will have that leverage because it will have many great products releasing, probably drive some people to buy it. But I still believe we should aim for a more affordable VR, even at the cost of the tech. I just want to see, in my case, of course, for my area expertise, I want to see great gains coming up. And if you
Right.
see great gains, people will start to buy. It's probably that simple.
Yeah, I think it's a great point about software versus hardware. Is like if you don't have any good software, or not any good, but like if there aren't consistently great games on a platform, it doesn't matter. I mean, I just remember thinking about the PS3 when it came out. You know, back then, super powerful system, but it was for being sold for like $500, $600, and there were no real great games on it.
I bought PS3, I believe, at day one. I was young, and I probably bothered my parents to buy it up until they actually caved. And I still remember that for that lack of gains, I played the demo from Metal Gear Solid 2, like, I don't know, 200 hours. It was a half an hour demo, and I think I know it pixel by pixel at this point. So, and back then there wasn't really any game pass or this kind of stuff where you can jump from games when you get bored. So it was a different time.
Yeah, very different time. And you're from Italy, right?
I am, yes, from Rome.
In the early days of this show, we used to talk about people's childhoods and everything, but we started to have like a lot of people from similar places, and I stopped, really going into that because it wasn't as interesting. But we haven't had anyone on from Italy, so I'm very interested to know, what was that like as a kid? What was that like growing up?
Bear in mind that I grew up in a part of Rome which is not, it doesn't have a good fame, let's put it this way, because of criminality, etc. Of course, not everybody in that part are like this, and not everything in Rome is like that, but there are some places that are worse than other for sure. And what was challenging is that when you have this focus of making it in a world that Italy doesn't really consider, which is the video game world, it's really difficult to work for great games in Italy, because at the end of the day there aren't many options. Back then, the biggest company was Milestone. In a way, it still is. Milestone is the company behind MotoGP, just for context. Today, we have some other example, like, for example, Ubisoft Milan, the guys behind My Rabbids. But back then, there wasn't many options to work at great games, so it's either small companies or indie companies, etc. And it was very hard to understand that instead, outside Italy, there was a place where you can be an associate, learn a lot of cool things, learn from the best, have that kind of mindset where you have this big group of people that can teach you a lot just by going into the office. When we were going to the office, but that's a different topic for the past few years, I guess. So that, plus the lack of a real education system that gets you through the steps you need to take to become a game developer, because there wasn't really almost anything recognized. There were some schools, but it was challenging. So either you find one of the schools and then you kind of put your foot in, or you start to be a self-taught man. And that's what I did. I went to a university that was explaining a little bit of many things, including coding, Photoshop, Maya, and all that kind of stuff. It was very random and not very well formed, in my opinion. But it gave me a way to learn about some stuff by knowing the right people. One of my very first job was actually from one of my professors then. In the meantime, I started studying when I was very little programming. I believe I was 5 or 6, if I remember correctly. And that was the kickstarter for me, like knowing how to do things. I still remember, I don't remember how old I was, but I remember vividly that I was playing a video game with my brother, which was one of the FIFA on the Sega Mega Drive. And I distinctly remember that I asked, how do you make those, meaning games? Like, I want to know, and no one could tell me anything. I didn't have any answer. There was no internet. I mean, there was, but it wasn't as it is right now. So yeah, it wasn't easy, but on the pro sides, on the pro column, I got to work on many different projects that were quick. They were forcing me to do a lot of stuff like creative production. I pretty much was a, how do you say, jack of all trades, master of none. That gave me a real insight on many things that then later became useful when I decided to move to London to join back then SlideMed, and decide to amp up a little bit the career in terms of project volume and in terms of ambitions. And I discovered that not everything I thought it was bad, it was actually bad. It's a kind of a unique path. Many coders goes through universities, start to learn coding very well, and they are much better than me at this point to code because they had a different kind of laying the ground path. But at the end of the day, I think I've done okay, with the caveat that doing this will mean that you leave behind a lot of tech knowledge that then you had to recover later. And that's probably the greatest mystery about every coder. If you stop studying even for a minute, you're kind of damned.
Yeah. Why were you interested more in the programming side than you were, say, the artistic side or some other discipline?
I believe because I sucked at the other things. I mean, there was like a choice. Like, you want to make games, okay? You have few paths: art, design, and programming. Now, design, especially in Italy, no one knew what that was. Like, if you ask people, can I be a game designer? Yet, what that means exactly? We didn't have that knowledge, and for many parts, we still don't have that knowledge about what a game designer does exactly. You need to go into the industry and see great game designer working to have a first glimpse, if you didn't study like it and if you didn't went to brighter schools. So that left me, when I was little, to decide between programming and art. And since I suck at drawing, which was the very best basic thing you do as a child, I said, hey, maybe the logical path, it's much better. But I never consider myself as an engineer, despite the role I actually have, because I always consider myself as a game developer. I will do anything that takes make a game. If making a game means, like, I don't know, knitting wool, or I don't know, making a pizza, I would do that. Instead, to make a game, you need to code. So I learned to code.
Beyond what you were mentioning earlier, what else did you do? How did you specifically teach yourself programming? What languages did you start with? Where did you begin?
I'd say I began with asking my mom for Dummies book of C++. That was probably my very first programming book, and gotta tell you, I understood nothing at the start. But
Yeah.
then it got into me, got into my skin, so I started to study everything I could put my hands on, and then I discovered that to make games you need an engine, and then I started to discover there were engine, or at least there were things that you needed to study more on the low level, so OpenGL. I mean, the usual suspect that you could find back then was the Red Book, which is a great book about how OpenGL works, still available today with many versions. There was this forum that was very historical called Nehat. It was spelled Nihi. Probably people that were into graphical programming know this very well. But then there were many resources. So I started to use some engines that were free. I distinctly remember that when before entering university, when I was 17 or so, I started, for example, using Ogre or Irlicht. There were free engine that you can code in C++, and I started having experiments in there. Unity was very far away from in terms of timeline. Unreal wasn't. I believe Unreal was already there, but wasn't really useful because it was having a commercial project, commercial license. Sorry. The fact that there weren't many options gave me the luck to try the hardest one, which felt more like proprietary engine that I have worked on in the past 10, 15 years, and less more ready solution. I believe for people nowadays to start in these, there is a lot of things that they can study, a lot of tech that they can catch up, but there are way more resources in terms of learning, tutorials, courses on Udemy. It's much easier, and at the same time is much of a nightmare because you don't really know where to start, what is
Right.
worth your time.
So what did you start creating when you sort of started to understand the basics of programming? Did you start to try and make smaller games, or did you just do sort of logic things? What were you making?
I made the same mistake every indie coder made. I tried to do the biggest game I could think
Right.
of. Like, can
Yeah.
we do another GTA? But I believe that's a rite of passage. If you don't do that when you're young, I believe you're missing out. I mean, many people will tell you
Yeah.
you need to do something very small, very contained because it teaches you a lot. I agree, but you need to try the craziness because it will
Yeah.
force you to find many solutions and then realize that you were stupid after all.
The first level I ever made was an outdoor level, and the assignment at school was to, just make an indoor level, something simple. And I was just like, oh, that's boring, man. I want to make like an outdoor level with a story and a narrative and all this stuff. So we're using Unreal. I wind up making this huge forest level, all these rocks, all these different kinds of trees. I wrote like a rock script to generate like random rocks and stuff. And it turned into this all consuming thing. And it wasn't a disaster. It had a waterfall too. It had all this stuff, but it was really ambitious. It wasn't great, but it was ambitious. I threw the kitchen sink at it, but it was huge in teaching me. Now you can understand what needs to be done practically now. So yeah, I totally agree with you that it is important to just be over ambitious. Screw up when you're young.
If you don't do that back then, you're not gonna have some teaching lesson. Then you always have time to understand that to make an open world, you need the streaming world partition, you need the quest system, you need the loading phases well planned. You need a lot of stuff that you didn't even think possible. Sometimes you discover this kind of stuff by making mistakes, like, hey, why this open world I'm trying to make very stupidly is now popping up in the screen loading like it just was created, and you discover, hey, world partition is a thing. So I mean, you can study this thing in theory, but sometimes learning on your skin is always a good thing.
Yeah, and I think that's the only way to really learn. I mean, you can look at books all day and talk to people, and there's value to be gained there, but until you do it, it doesn't really matter.
I agree. I mean, we can see that people, associates, when we hire associates, we can see a transformation through even the very first year. Like an associate coming out from a university and the same associate 1 year later are kind of like two different coders, like day and night, because they learn to do stuff in development environment, and then in production they learn so a lot. They start to have a very good interaction with the team. They start to understand that you need to code simple instead of trying to use 72,000 templates because it make you cooler. So there are some aspects that you go through actually working in a game industry that you can just see it when you start working. And that's probably my best advice. Do things, because the best way to proceed is to do things. You need to plan it. You need to be good at feature planning, system design planning, and I agree that we always need a plan. That the production part in me is extremely extremely severe on that part, but eventually you need to stop and say, okay, I actually need to do this thing.
Did you ever hit a wall with programming when you thought, I can't do this, this is crazy, I'm done, or you had doubt, anything like that?
I'd say yes and no, because yes, every day you hit a wall. Every time you try to do a new thing, you hit a wall, and you have that period where say, hey, this is not working. Like, I don't know, one of the wall I actually remember was trying to use the shaders the first time. And I mean, like really coding in OpenGL how the shaders should interact with your shader, compiling them, and then trying to understand how they operate on the graphical card. And I know the graphical programming, that's not my area of expertise, and probably never be, because again, jack of all trades, master of none. But you need to do what you need to do sometimes. And the first time I went into it, it was kind of a wall, but that's just an example. In terms of, in general terms, the answer was yes and no, because also I know that again, I'm not in this to create games. So whenever I hit the wall, I always try to find an alternative solution. So I never get stuck in a wall too much. I always trying to find either something else to do or a person who knows more, and that's probably the one of the advice. For example, in our company, whenever someone joins, we always say the same things, like don't be shy and ask. There is no stupid question, and this applies from when you're young to when you have 35 years of experience. You cannot know everything. You just can't. And it's not a shame to ask people that are better than you for stuff. If there is someone that is that have, I don't know, memory profiling skills and is very expert in that, and you don't, ask. Just ask. Just to give you an example, if you don't ask, that's where you're making the mistake.
Yeah, that's classic programming. Feels like a lot of the best programmers I know would define themselves. I'm speaking for them and I shouldn't, but problem solvers, right? When there's a problem, it's like you're not just going to throw up your hands and give up. You're going to figure out how to solve the problem.
Yeah, you always do the same things, like splitting a huge problem in smaller problems, try to find smaller solution and try to apply that also to your personal life, I believe. I cannot qualify as one of the good programmers for the reasons I told. I only care about games, but I've met and worked with extremely good programmers, and I had very good mentors, and I was very lucky, especially in the past 4 years, to know extremely talented people, and they all think of the same. Like, never get stuck, always find a solution, and always find a realistic solution, because if you design something that will take 6 years and 20 people to do it, and it will solve a problem that manually you can do it in 10 minutes, maybe it's not worth it. So there is always a trade-off on what you're trying to do and what's the outcome. Always ask yourself, why am I doing this?
So you mentioned that you love production. When did that start? Why did it start? I have never met a programmer that I know, at least, that loves production process. So take us through how that happened.
Yeah, I'm considered the freak on nature also from my colleagues. Don't worry. I like planning. I like calls. I like all that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's peculiar, I reckon. That started. It's like I was mentioning. I was forced to do everything, and at some point, by trying everything, I discovered that I actually like to plan things, to have an aerial view of the projects I'm working on, seeing the high-end goals, see how all the team is going, try to see what everybody's doing in a broader term. There are many coders who are great at going deep into a specific system, etc. And unfortunately, that is not one of my strengths. So I need to play with what I can do best. And usually, learning your weakness is like one of the best soft skill you can develop. It's also one of the hardest that you need to develop. So once I found out that I was liking it, I discovered that, hey, maybe I can do kind of like a cross. Not saying I'm a producer, far from it. We have producers in our company that are amazing, and thank God we have them, because if we all come down to my work, it will probably be already exploded. But I try to help as much as I can on that side because I really enjoy it. So it started like a necessity. It developed like a side part of my job, and it's now part of what I'm doing because I am a technical director at the moment, which means that I have to have the clear vision of what the project looks like from the view of the mountain. Let's put it this way, um, and that comes with a production part in it. You cannot be just a coder when you need to drive the team to do a game. Again, start as a necessity, follow up as one of the things I enjoy, and I'm actually liking it to be that cross between tech and planning.
Well, I tell you what, you're probably a producer's best friend.
I'm not gonna say that. You should ask my colleagues. And
Yeah. Well, on paper at least. Do you have any explicit experiences with production, like any good or bad things that happen where you really learned something from those experiences that help you now?
bad production experience, I had a few. Probably one of the greatest bad production experience was when I was I don't know 20, and we needed to port a game from a proprietary engine to Unity, and we the production on that project was that we needed to estimate what was the work and what were the pain points, the thing that could go wrong, pretty much plan for disaster and then apply the usual production style in Italy. And we didn't do that very well. Wasn't even good at it, and the people were nearby me probably overlooked at it. And we ended up having a project that was supposed to last 3 months. After 6 months, it wasn't ready and was disregarded by the client. The client literally rejected the product and said, "I'm gonna go with this to somebody else." And I can tell you many things that went well production-wise in the past years. I actually work on releasing, I believe, I work on many games that were actually successful, but as for the interview side, you should never be afraid of failure, because whenever you fail something like this, you learn something. I never made that mistake again, never. I always trying to look everything that could go wrong. I'm not saying that I'm gonna be doing perfect planning, but not as bad as that one. For the good example, I'm not gonna mention anything for the reason that a good production is like a good waiter at the restaurant. You don't realize it's there. Everything goes smoothly. You get served your meal, you get served your water. You don't even realize they're there. You keep chatting with your friend, and everything is enjoyable. If you have that kind of producer, keep them tight to you, because they are precious.
You've worked on a lot of car games, but none more infamous than the Fast and the Furious Crossroads. How much can you talk about that project?
First of all, I always use it as a point to during my interviews, because I always start with, "Hey, I participated in the game that was voted the worst game of the decade," and usually is a very nice icebreaker, because then you start wondering, like, okay, what were you doing there? Why it was bad? Why what part was good, etc. And I want to start with the good things. First of all, the team behind it was one of the best engineering team I ever worked with. That's without a doubt. There was so much skill, so much knowledge, so much passion, even about the franchise. The creative team, for example, was really hyped to work on a Fast and Furious game. They were fan of the first hours of the franchise. So all the problem that game had was bad luck and probably bad production, not in terms of producers, but in terms of putting the game in a weird period. Still remember that back then the Slime Studio was releasing 3 games in the same month. Project Cars Core, Project Cars 3, and Fast and Furious Crossroads in a great variety of different platforms. And I still remember everyone doing whatever they can to release. They literally went not the extra mile, like the extra parsec, and there is nothing to blame to them. It's just that usually to make these kind of gains, you need to allow these kind of gains the time they need and the resources they need, and then were neither one or the other, I believe, in my opinion. And he ended up with a product that was supposed to be way more fun than what it was. I still enjoy some of the bits. I don't think it's all bad as many people says.
I don't understand why it got so much hate. Honestly, I never played it, but I watched enough footage of it from people I watch that play games, and I was like, this isn't terrible. Some of the missions were a little repetitive, and I don't think the online gameplay was as good as it could have been, but it wasn't like a total travesty. It wasn't Duke Nukem Forever or something like that. And I don't know if it was just because it had the Fast and the Furious name on it that it got so much attention. I think that could certainly have had something to do with it. If that had been a game that wasn't tied to an IP, I don't think it would have blown up the way it did.
Probably. I mean, there were some things that weren't as clean as they could be, but some other sections were more fun to play. Mm-hmm. And I still believe that that was the best part. Much of the complaints I read about it because I was curious, right. About what the game. That wasn't my main project back then. I was the lead engineer on Project Cars Pro, and I was pretty much landed to the team. So I was landed to the gameplay and system team. I still believe that the biggest complaint we had, it was like, this game is exaggerated. Like you have the grapple hook, you have the bazooka, the explosion.
Which is crazy. I mean, Fast and the Furious is incredibly exaggerated. I mean, you got cars jumping out of planes in the 7th or 8th one or whatever it was. I mean, that's ridiculous to me.
Yeah, exactly. If you cut away the first part of the franchise, which was the first couple of movies where they were mostly more about racing, then the movie franchise started really to exaggerate in every possible way. And literally, I mean, last one was literally in space.
Right.
So I don't get that critique. I mean, there were other critiques that were solid and fair, but that one in particular struck me because I don't think that was actually accurate.
Right. Yeah, no, I don't think so either. But yeah, so lack of time sounds like was one of the things that really hurt it, though. What you're saying.
Well, yeah, lack of time and resources, and it's a pattern that you see a lot in the games these days. The game development changed a lot since the days where you couldn't apply a day 0 patch or you could have DLCs. Back then, you need to release a game that was on the disk, and that was it. Nowadays, that process of having the games be able to update themselves pretty quickly started to become a pattern in game development, like let's release as early as possible and then we fix it later. But most of the games that do that don't fix it later, and the other games that instead start to fixing the game, they do it with a lot of resources and a lot of effort, and if you do it right with the heart in the right place, you end up with great results. There are many games that started poorly. I don't know, the very two first games that I can think about this pattern are No Man's Sky and Sea of Thieves. But we then saw what happened later. They put heart on it, they put effort on it, they improved and improved and improved and improved, and now there are two very different games from when they started. And that's it, like something that I have a lot of steam. Like I really like that they done that, but not every game can afford that. It's almost like a life. Not so almost like it is a live service environment, and continuous effort over the years. Sometimes you need to realize that the scope of the game is smaller, and you need to present a smaller game. I actually don't like the fact that usually the game needs to achieve a certain amount of gameplay hours to be viable to be sold at 70
Totally
euros,
agree.
for example.
Yeah.
Sometimes I like to see, I don't know, a game that is 5 hours, 10 hours, but done with a real state of art. And the games that I like the most in the past gen, for example, again, aside Breath of the Wild, which was pretty much the game of the last gen, and I believe almost 98% of the people will agree with me. But for example, the games that I remember the most, one of above all is Outer Wilds. Otherwise, it was a game much smaller in scope. It wasn't that big AAA blockbuster, but I still suggest to play it to every friends and colleagues I have if they haven't, even on above many other bigger games, because it really showed that when you take care of a certain gameplay aspects, a certain narrative path, and you do it with the right amount of passion and of course expertise. Because if you only have passion but no expertise, you're not going to do anything at all. And then you deliver a product that stays into that boundaries. You really say, okay, this is a game I actually want to spread the word because it deserves it. I want to
Yeah.
see that way more than triple A's.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, also the older I get, the less time I have for playing games. So when I do play a game, I don't want to play like a 80-hour game or whatever. Rarely will I make an exception for that. Or even something over like 20 hours. Like I'd rather have like a solid, like you're saying, 5, 10 hour, whatever game that is great. That may not be as long as other games, but it takes me on a ride and I have a good time with it. That's the most important thing to me is like brevity is so important, I feel like, in games. And sometimes things just get tacked on and you have to keep going and going and going. Like, I mean, the last Red Dead Redemption, which I like quite a bit, Red Dead Redemption 2, it took me like 9 months to finish it because there's so much to do, which is cool, but it's also like, man alive, I'm kind of ready for this to be over.
I I agree. I mean, it depends on what part of the life you're living, I guess. Because for example, I was the main tank of a very large guild in Italy for 6 or 7 years in World of Warcraft, and
Right.
I
So you want
believe
that to
if
go on forever. Yeah.
yes, if I believe if I go back there and use the slash played command that gives you the total amount of gameplay hours, I believe we are having, I don't know, probably 100,000 hours on that game.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that was a different time in my life. Now, of course, as you, I expect more to have a shorter but better experience. Of course, having a kid doesn't help playing. But I get that people want to play more and they want to be connected to the game to the point that they had fun on the first 20, 30 hours and they want to keep going on. My problem with that is that many times, especially open world, but it's not just stricter to the open world, try to do many repetitive things just to hook you up, make you farm, and
Mm-hmm.
keep you in there with low quality content. And you can even see that in the very same game. Like the main quest is awesome, and then you go in the secondary quests that are there just to stretch the time.
RPG elements feed in a little too much, I think, to that, where it's like, oh, yeah, you got to get a little stronger. So let's add some side quests for you, sort of deal.
Yeah, I agree. Just to give you an example, I loved Elden Ring as much as the next guy.
Yeah, I still haven't played it. I definitely want to. I love most of the From Software games, so I definitely need to play it at some point.
Yeah, to tell you the truth, my favorite game from Software is Sekiro. For a
Oh, I
very
love
specific,
Sekiro.
there is a very specific reason why I love Sekiro. It's because they found this gameplay aspect that is magical, where you don't level the character, you level
Yes.
yourself.
Yes.
You feel like that you click with the game and you level up as a gamer, not the character
Totally
that you
agree.
play on. And
Totally agree.
after Genichiro, everything changed. And
Yeah.
that
That was
like the
such.
cathartic moment.
Oh, yes, that was like that's the put up or shut up moment where you're either gonna beat that guy or this is where you stop, kind of thing. This is where the game breaks you. But when yeah, I totally agree with that. Like those games, and I love that they did that because they are, they make RPGs, and Sekiro is not an RPG.
It is
And
not.
you're exactly right. Like you got better as a player as you went along. Yeah, you improved your health and things like that, but it was mostly like, how good can you get at this? how good can you get at the parrying system and stunning people and whatnot. I thought it was a brilliant, absolutely brilliant from a systemic standpoint, a pitch perfect game.
Yeah, it's frustrating. I'm not gonna say it's not, because it is. But there is one brilliant thing. You mentioned that,
Yeah.
yeah, you can upgrade your health, but to upgrade your health, you need to beat the boss. You cannot farm to upgrade your health. That was the brilliant move to me. It was one of those gameplay concepts that changes a lot. Like, for example, talking about Sea of Thieves, one of the greatest things about Sea of Thieves is the concept of you lose everything after you play. You lose your ship, you need to restart. And if you don't put your treasures in, you don't collect your treasure with the quest givers, you even lose that. So having the chest with the treasure is not a guarantee that you've done that. That started a whole kind of meta game around that, like the chest is not as safe, someone can steal it, you can sink your ship and lose it, etc., and put that kind of fear effort that front software games have a lot, like I have something to lose. And this concept is not present in many games nowadays, because they tend to save a lot during the process. They tend to make you start very close from when you died. I don't say that there shouldn't be easy game. I like having easy game once in a while. I like having even walking experience. If I have to quote another great game from the past generation, for me was what remains of Edith Finch, for example. Is It's a walking game. You don't have to do almost anything, but it's stuck in my memory. I love it, and I replay it or rewatch it on YouTube regularly. So you don't have to serve a difficult game just because difficult is good. You have to serve a challenge. Either the challenge is a narrative or a challenge is a gameplay concept. It has to have something unique in it. Otherwise, you're not bringing value to the gaming world.
Yeah, and you're going to lose people that like us that have been playing games for a long time and sort of know the ins and outs of how what the experiences that we want. Last question I have for you, totally unrelated to a lot of things we've been talking about, but what do you think about AI for art? I think it's a really interesting subject, and we've talked to a lot of artists about it, but we never talked to a programmer about it. So I'm interested in your thoughts on creating art with AI.
I have a more general opinion on AI that eventually derives into the AI artist. I want to start with the fact that, of course, in the past months, the advent of ChatGPT and GitHub Copilot and all these kind of tools kind of strangled a little bit the discussion around the AI artists. So there were a period a few months back where when Midjourney or DALL-E were taking the scene, because they were the most flashing usage of AI, and then ChatGPT came out and kind of outshadowed them. As a coder, the AI, what is doing AI, I'm trying to embrace it, because I would be extremely worried if I was an associate right now about AI for coders. I was literally talking about this with a colleague today, and since I'm not an associate anymore, I can embrace it, use it. I ask ChatGPT stuff every day about stuff that I want to do with perforce or with the code, or asking to comment some pieces of code, or even ask about, I don't know, how should I ask some kind of question during my calls. It's very good to do these kind of things, and I try to embrace it, not to be scared of it. I can understand why AI artists are scared, because while in my example it's an integration, in their example it's a substitution. And it's a substitution for low level jobs, because a good concept artist, a good artist that already has a career, will have less difficulty to sell his position, to sell itself to the client, because he will say, hey, you're not just buying someone that would draw something on the paper or on Photoshop or on whatever other program they're going to use, but you're buying someone that can think about the concept for the industry, that has experience, that knows how to deliver something that players will want to play in terms of captivating art, etc. But for many other people who work in that to produce content, and when the client especially doesn't really care about the quality, AI art is a threat. Artists need to embrace it, not in a sense that they need to surrender to it, but they need to understand how to use it, because many things will move into that direction, whether they want it or not, and whether we like it or not. And most of us don't like it, but it's going to happen anyway. It's already happening. There are like web series, comics that are using environments or backgrounds done with Midjourney. There are many other kind of AI that are serving animations, for example, for 3D models, and there are a lot of usage of what is happening. So even if you don't like it, my suggestion, which is what we coders are trying to do, is to get along with it because there's no escape. And probably the other controversial point is rights, like who hold the rights of the training model. You train the AI almost without asking permission to the artist, and it's already too late to rectify that. But it's not too late to talk about what will happen next. And it doesn't concern very much coders, because if you think about it, coders have their code nested in their products since when they start. There are games that were 15 years ago that are still running the code that I wrote, and there was really no problem in to derive the code, reuse it, destroy it, and write them from scratch. We are not as concerned as that, also because tech evolves a lot. So usually what you wrote 6 months ago, maybe a plugin got updated and you need to redo it from scratch. Hopefully not, but it can happen. With art, the things are more, it's more difficult than that, because if you train an AI to do your style, then the AI can replicate your style, not very greatly as you can. There are a lot of different problems, like the most famous one is the hands problem with the fingers. AI still cannot draw fingers very well. But
sometimes faces too. Faces get a little messed up, and like in the eyes and whatnot.
yeah, that's actually sometimes it's a censorship, not terms of tech. They're not great at it, but most part of why you always sometimes see the face blurred is because of a block that the developers of the AI make.
Okay.
In terms of fingers, that's a good example of a clear example of you're hanging on the fact that the AI is bad at it, but you're not considering two things. One, it's not going to be bad at it forever. Two, even now you can take the image and just fix the stuff that is just broken. And I have many artists friends that are starting to play with it, started to play with level like the temperature level, which is this level that pretty much tells you how much the AI should explore from your prompt. So you prompt a text, and the AI, based on that level, this is one of the basic settings that you can touch in this kind of AI, tells you how much it should respect your prompt or how much it should go in a fantasy way into other direction, and gives you options. There are many other settings, and there are also possibility to fine tune the model and put other training sets to it, and have many artist friends that are using it to fix the stuff that the AI is doing well, and then pass it over to do the rest. And there are many other friends that instead wants to do everything manually because they still feel that there is a great touch. As with everything, this is my credo for everything. The truth is always in the middle. It's always a balanced act. If you start to only use AI, you're gonna have a bad time. If you don't embrace it, you're gonna have a bad time. Try to integrate it. And again, this stands for everything. We are on the verge of seeing a similar approach to ChatGPT in Bing, because Microsoft poured, I believe, 10 billions, if I'm correct, into OpenAI. So they invested a lot in it, and they're going to integrate. It's actually already integrated, but it's a closed beta into Bing. So your next thing you're going to see, it's something weird that we never thought it would happen. People will start using Bing instead of Google to search things. That's crazy if you think about
the Google
it.
Killer.
Can you imagine that?
Yeah,
I mean, I can't.
It's nuts.
I really
can't
can't
either. Yeah, all this AI stuff are really at the precipice here of something. I don't know if it's going to be great or if it's going to be terrible or somewhere. Maybe it'll be somewhere in the middle. But we're definitely about to see it really take off in a lot of different ways.
The thing with the AI, respect to other technology that they try to push, is that it works. And when something works, even if it doesn't work very well at the moment, but you have a prospect that it works, if something works, it gets interested, it gets investors, it gets users base, it gets attention. And when something gets attention, it's really hard to slow. And I don't even see the reason to slow it, because if I can have a chat GPT like into my search engine giving me the answer plus fetching me the links I need, it means the real Web 3.0. That's going to be the real thing. And again, sometimes I go into my work and start to ask things to ChatGPT. Most of the time it's not correct what they say, but it gives me hints to search into the right direction. So the ability for us human to distinct if the AI is going wrong, is going good, is still on us to study, evaluate, and try to understand what they're saying. But the prompt of easing up some of those things, it can be used. I mean, probably the stupidest example I can think of is people not knowing how to do simple math nowadays with addition, multiplication, etc. Because a calculator, now you have it on your smartphone, etc. But I think the biggest question is, are you really missing it? Like, is anyone missing doing math in your head?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think anyone's missing that, but it also becomes, when you don't have the technology available to you for whatever reason, then you sort of become a little brain dead, I feel like. The potential for that in terms of like I think people can become so reliant on something that if they can't do it for themselves, then that becomes a problem. I think that's the thing that kind of scares me the most about the future. Like GPS is, people don't even have to know where they're going anymore. But if their phone dies, I remember I had someone I went to with school that was totally reliant on GPS. His GPS died one day, and this was in like 2014. And he's like, I didn't know where I was going. I don't know how I got here. Like, it took me like 2 hours as opposed to 30 minutes. So that's the thing I kind of worry about, is like the smarter AI gets, the more dependent we are on it, the less we have to do, then we become less self-sufficient, which somewhat is good, but can also have its detriments too.
That's true. I mean, it's important to train a good mental process to think about things in an efficient way, even if you don't know some stuff. If I get lost with my GPS, I'll probably be in the very same situation as your friend. But after a couple of hours of desperation, I will probably start to go back into my mindset that, hey, I don't have the GPS. Let's find a solution. Again, problem solving.
Yeah.
But I don't want to even start to think about the plan now if we don't have things, because I believe we lost the train. We lost the train where we started to have penicillin, or when we started to have even more basic stuff. I mean, looking back and saying, I'm going to miss these things, yes, it's true. But as long as your mind can think, I believe you're always going to find the solution. And I hope we are really far away from a post-apocalyptic deadline where we need to adapt to everything else.
Yeah.
So I want to be optimistic.
Yeah, no, for sure. But I think that's important, what you said earlier. It's like, how do you utilize it? Don't let it replace. Maximize its efficiency, but don't let it replace you as an artist, as a programmer, as a person.
Yeah, I mean, also another probably advice I can give: learn about, train and develop your soft skills. This is a thing that will never be replaced, because especially in the video game industry, but in every industry, there is a human aspect that even if you have a bunch of machine working on your code, there is still someone that wants a product and someone that needs to deliver it. And there are always going to be that kind of interaction. And always going to be a level of, like, for example, in game design, yes, you can ask one of these AI to design a game, but it always going to be a game design from a trained model. As I was saying, for example, with Outer Wilds, the greatest thing about games like that is that they push the limit forward. They push the limit further. And to do that, you need to do new things. Of course, it's in the human nature to steal. Who said that the great good artists copy, the great artist steal? Was Picasso, I believe. I don't remember, but the point is that is true. Like, we always have a base ground where we start looking at things and we develop new ideas using those ideas, and that kinds of what the AI is doing. But we have a bigger advantage of that, because we can really create new things, even if we are just taking inspiration. AI at the moment can't. Again, I'm not saying cannot do it in the future. It probably shouldn't do it because of how the trained models are working. But I want to quote a coder, Distra, which is famous for a lot of path-finding algorithms, that once said that they asked him if he thinks that the AI can think. And he said that asking me if the AI can think is asking me like if a submarine can swim. There are two different processes, and you cannot really compare. You can compare the basics because, for example, stuff like reinforcement learning was modeled around how humans and animals train about things. One biggest example is how kids start learning how to walk, which is trying to do a lot of random movements, and then whenever they got the right one, the body releases a dopamine to tell the kid that is doing correctly. This is what's happening with reinforcement learning. For example, like you train the AI to try to do many things, and then there is a reward when they do the correct things based on certain parameters. So the base ground of how the AI is modeled is similar to what we studied, but then eventually it becomes very different whenever we reach that point of the unknown, how our brains really connects all these kind of thoughts and create new ones. So if you need to leverage that, at least for now, it should be that kind of soft skills and inventive side.
Yeah, no, well said. I think that brings us perfectly to the conclusion here. So Fabio, thank you so much for stopping by to talk with us. A really good time, especially this AI stuff. I could talk about that all day, but I don't want to take up too much of your time. But thanks again for being on the show. We really enjoyed it.
Thanks a lot. It was really a pleasure to be here, and I'm always glad to have discussion like that. I have it every day, and I cannot get it enough.
All right, that wraps up this week's show. We want to thank Fabio again for being our guest. To find out more about Mudstack, head over to mudstack.com, where you can follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, and join our community on Discord. And of course, we want to thank you for listening. We'll see you next time on Clear as Mud.